Russia's assault on Ukraine in 2022 represents the most serious geopolitical crisis since the Second World War, and the nuclear posturing and threats by Russia are unprecedented in human history. But even before, through 2021, the ratcheting up of internal repression and persecution of opposition figures in Russia had created a foreboding sense of crisis and escalation. In today's episode, we'll look at how the secret state apparatus is being used in wartime and how this differs from the 2000s, the 1990s, and even the Soviet period. Who are the Siloviki and how do they suppress dissent in Russia? Welcome to Silicon Curtain. Please like and subscribe if you like the amazing guests that feature on the channel, as it helps other people to discover their strong voices and expertise. Andrei Soldatov is a Russian investigative journalist and security services expert. Together with fellow journalist Irina Baragan, he is co-founder of Agentura.ru, a watchdog of the Russian Secret Services activities. He's been covering security services and terrorism issues since 1999. Together with Irina, Andrei has co-authored 3 books: The New Nobility, The Restoration of Russia's Security State and the Enduring Legacy of the KGB, 2010, The Red Web, The Struggle Between Russia's Digital Dictators and the New Online Revolutionaries, 2015, and more recently, The Compatriots, The Brutal and Chaotic History of Russia's Exiles, Emigres, and Agents Abroad, 2019, and I believe that edition has been updated in the light of recent events. Until 2008, Andrei Soldatov wrote for Novaya Gazeta, but has since written for many other publications. He is a visiting fellow of King's College London and senior fellow at CEPA, the Centre for European Policy Analysis. Well, Andrei, we're going to put links to all of those books into the description, and I absolutely think that anyone interested in what's going on in Russia really has to start with your books. They're a fantastically informative way. But I've wanted to get you on the channel really since the start, so this is a great pleasure today to introduce you to the audience.
Thank you very much, and thank you for having me.
Well, let's really dive into some of the tricky questions, because this is going to be quite, I think, an in-depth conversation. I've read a couple of your recent articles, and one that really grabbed my attention is this idea of the GULAG economy, the idea that Russia is transforming its economy into a total war economy and society, that we have Generation Z education, we have implicit terror that goes along that, but looking at this concept of the Gulag economy, what really are the features and implications of this process that you've identified?
Yes, it is quite an interesting development we've seen over the last few months, I would say starting in the autumn of 2022. And well, we all know that Russia is in a huge crisis because of the war and of the sanctions. And well, one of these crises is the shortage of skilled workers. And given the fact that now Russia needs to produce a lot of ammunition, lots of missiles and tanks, they need people. And they need these people not only on the battlefield, which is also a problem. And we already see that, well, the Kremlin might get quite inventive at trying to find new people for the Russian army. So we see mobilization, we see the Wagner Group and some other private military companies, well, funded by the Russian government. But also it goes for the military-industrial complex. And now they understand that very soon they might feel shortage of around 400,000 people, which is a significant number because this industry employs around 2 million people. So it is a significant number. They need to find a way where to find new people. And one of the sources are the huge penal system Russia still has. And I would say that it's getting quite interesting that every time Putin finds himself in a crisis during this war, he's trying to look in the Russian past and say, before the war, he usually used examples from quite a recent Soviet past, I would say 1970s, 1980s, maybe in the 1960s. But he was never extremely happy to use Stalin's experience. But these days it changed. So more and more we see that Putin is referring, and his people are referring to the experiences and practices used and developed by Stalin. And that goes for secret services, for the military industrial complex, for many things.
And this is an interesting idea, isn't it? Because the Western commentators, right since the war began, and right since some sanctions began, have been expecting some kind of popular uprising, huge discontent from the economic dislocation. But actually, there's a far more complex and interesting process taking place, isn't there? I mean, first of all, for general foodstuffs, the economy, as we saw in the 90s, is almost certainly able to cope with that. Grey imports have filled some of these sort of essential gaps. But there hasn't been the huge economic dislocation. And is part of that because of the vast investment being channeled from sort of gas and oil into the defense industry. And actually, millions of people are employed by the state and by the defense industries. So maybe they haven't yet felt the full force of the economic pain.
Well, I think it's about several things. One is, you are absolutely right, the military-industrial complex is really huge, especially in Russian regions. And it's been getting bigger and bigger starting in 2015 after the annexation of Crimea. And the reason for that was quite interesting. Many Russian corporations were getting really international before the annexation of Crimea. And of course, many of them lost their contracts in the West. And that was the moment Putin decided that it's time for the Russian oligarchs to help the state. But also he understood that he himself needed to provide some support for the Russian oligarchs because they were losing their contracts in the West and in the world. So his way to help them and to ask them to help was to provide them with military contracts. And I remember when I was in Moscow and like having my meetings with some people in big companies, all of a sudden around 2015, they started about mentioning things which I completely forgot, like the military commissions, the first sections. And I understood that now, because they are having these military contracts, we need to work more closely with the Russian security services, with the military, we need to please them. And it was a striking contrast with what I remember from the 2000s, when it was all about corruption and court decisions which were not extremely fair, and corrupting officials in the FSB and the Interior Ministry. So that changed many years ago. I would say that to some extent, Putin prepared the country and the economy for this war. The other problem is that you might expect some real unrest, not because people, and that is a Russian tradition, not because you suddenly feel that your salary changed, but when you feel you lost your job. And that was a big concern of the government in the summer. They feared that there might be massive layoffs in the regions, and that never happened. So probably it's also one of the reasons why we do not see any protests. But finally, of course, repressions play a huge role in that. You simply cannot protest these days in Russia. It was an option 3 years ago, 4 years ago, maybe even 2 years ago. But after the protests in Belarus, Putin learned this lesson. You just need to apply more force. And the more brutal it is, the better. So these days, there is no space to go to the streets and to say you are unhappy with the war or with your jobs or with your position.
To that extent, I mean, we were talking before we hit the record button, and I think that's fascinating. You mentioned Belarus. To an extent, I think, to people observing, the situation in Russia over the last couple of years, Belarus has almost been like a laboratory in terror and repression, hasn't it? I mean, what's your view there? Has Putin been trying out techniques that all along he intended to perhaps apply to the Russian Federation itself?
I would say it was a mutually benefited process. So, for instance, Lukashenko was not extremely good at propaganda. So when the protest started in Belarus, he asked Putin and his people to send some very prominent propagandist to Minsk to help to change the state television of Belarus, and it became much more aggressive as a result of this. Russian visitors, and they've been working in Minsk ever since. So we see that it's not only for Putin, Belarus is not only for Putin to watch, but also for Lukashenko's. Of course, Russia is a good example of how to do things. But in terms of applying brutal force, yes, I think Putin watched closely Belarus, and he understood something we misunderstood. We as Russian liberals, we always have this opinion that if you have like 80% of the country against the leader, it inevitably would lead to the revolution. And unfortunately, in Belarus, it led to disaster. In Russia, we never had 80% of population against Putin. At the height of the Russian protests in 2012, we got maybe 100,000 people on the streets, which is almost nothing in terms of the population of the country. So, of course, it added to the feeling of desperation and inertia and depression among Russian liberals. And again, it benefited Putin.
And that's an interesting question, isn't it? That threshold, because I've been speaking to a lot of Ukrainians, and it seems that the Maidan, the Revolution of Dignity, was an awakening. And I think historically, it's going to come to be seen as a pivotal event in history, like sort of the revolutionary events of the 19th century. But it's the point at which people really started to understand that, they had to take control of their own destiny. They had to recreate the institutions of Ukraine, but also that idea of a pivotal point of protest. There were literally hundreds of thousands, weren't there, in Kiev during those protests, which is a much higher percentage of the total population and population of that city itself. So you're saying Russia, even Bolotnaya, never reached anything like that kind of critical mass?
No, and of course, for many of us who were in Moscow and St. Petersburg during the protests, and all these years after this protest and after they were crushed by Putin, we always asked ourselves this question: why Maidan was completely different? Because it was so similar on the surface. Facebook started Maidan, and Facebook was actually used it to launch the very first protests in 2011, 2012. Young people with no organization, with no previous experience in political activities. No political party was ever actually involved at organizing protests in Moscow or Kiev. And it was all about people who were unhappy with the president in Kiev and in Moscow. And now we think that there were several reasons. Of course, in Russia, we never had this huge difference between two parts of the country. It was never like East and West, like you see in Ukraine. But also, unfortunately, Putin found a way how to play with fears and stereotypes of the Russian middle class. There was always this huge feeling of insecurity in the Russian society, and we got it because of the 1917 revolution, that if we do something wrong, we can get another bloody revolution and Bolsheviks like destroying our houses and our properties and all of that. So actually, Putin found a way how to play stereotypes of the Russian middle classes, which became quite significant, especially in big cities, against its interests. And I remember very vividly that the war in Syria was exploited by Russian propaganda. Basically, the message was, do you want this kind of bloodbath on your streets? And lots of people, liberal people, they turned against protesters, against Navalny, because we wanted prosperity and security, very basic things, but that benefited Putin.
And I think it's an interesting process as well, because again, you speak to Ukrainians and they've become aware. I mean, the revolutions might have been almost accidental, but they were a reflection of a growing civil society. And I think it's almost like a sort of feedback loop, isn't it? As these protests grew, people began to realize how to self-organize. They began to experiment with different processes, different modes of self-organization. That is now transforming into various techniques to counter propagandistic narratives, you know, and not all those ideas work, but you see almost like a laboratory of counter disinformation taking place since 2014. What I find fascinating about the so-called liberal opposition that Ukrainians have such a problem with is that Navalny's team still seem to be focused on the idea of corruption as that trigger point conversation, the one that is going to engage with the Russian population. What they don't seem to be doing is creating initiatives and campaigns and on-the-ground activism, or even talking about the process of how you dismantle not only the totalitarian state, but the sort of hybrid informational state you were describing that's been so effective at controlling people's heads and actions. What do you think the opposition needs to do in order to advance the liberal cause in Russia and not cede power to the growing military blogger nationalist cause? Because that's also quite a strong voice that's grown up during this war, well, even since 2014, of course, when it was being effectively used in support of, the Donbass campaign and so on.
Yes, absolutely. We all, for years, we have had these debates with Navalny's people and other activists in Russia, because you're absolutely right. There is this fixation with fighting corruption. And to some extent, I understand why. Of course, in the 2000s, especially, when we got this growth of Russian economy, and you can see, especially on Moscow streets, all these luxury cars, and on Rublovka you see all these cottages, actually not cottages, but palaces, and the oligarchs, and you see these corrupt generals and ministers. You might think this is the thing. This is the main question of Russian politics, which unfortunately was not such a big I would say it was important, but it was not that significant for many in Russia. First of all, many Russian people, because of lack of political culture, especially in regions, they accepted corruption as something close to the rules of nature. So if you live in some small town in central Russia, you just accept it, that of course governor's son and his daughter should control part of the industry and all restaurant networks in your city. It's just part of the way things are organized in the nature. It's just like that. You cannot change it. You cannot find your place. You cannot expect anything better. And we had that. The other problem is that probably Navalny's people and other activists believed that success of Yeltsin might be revisited, because Yeltsin in the 1980s and the beginning of 1990s, he became that prominent because he criticized the political party, the Communist Party, for corruption. And it was a very straightforward, very understandable message. Now the problem is that Putin has a very appealing message for the Russians. And it's much more appealing and much more understandable than what we have to say. Well, all these calls for greatness of Russia, that we need to get back what is right, which should be ours by right, and all of this revanchism, it just has this appeal. And we talk, Russian liberals, we have some ideas about the future, but we are completely confused, especially after the war started, because so many things became more questionable. Well, the Russian history, for instance. For Yeltsin, it was much more easy. He just said, look, we just need to get back to where we left in 1917. It was the great Russian Empire, well, to great Russia before the revolution, before these intellectuals and aristocracy and all of that, and Russian culture, of course. Now we cannot say that, because if you look at the Russian history of the 19th century or 18th century, well, it sounds horrible, because it's all about imperial wars and bloody conflicts and invasions and all of that. And back in the 1990s, people didn't want to talk about it, didn't want to think about it. They had very simple image of the country past. Just get rid of communism and it would be great again. Now we cannot use it. And that makes us even more confused. And again, this is a problem when you try to win hearts and minds. You need to have a very simple but strong message to your people. Putin has it, unfortunately. It's horrible, but it's very straightforward and it's very understandable. For Russian liberals, it's a big problem.
And of course, there are lots of things that I think only come out in history, don't they? And as you've said here, Putin's actions since 2014, of course, but especially when the world has really only paid attention from February last year, it's as if his actions in the present have shone a light backwards onto history and reframed for many people a lot of history. If Yeltsin and his successors had pursued cultural power, soft power, economic power, it may be that the relatively positive view many people had of Russia, the sort of pass that Russia had been given after the fall of the Soviet Union, it's quite possible that a period of reinvention could have taken place. But Putin has, to an extent, poisoned the well now, hasn't he, with his actions for maybe generations to come.
Yes, and I remember vividly when it changed. Before 2014, the usual historical frame was about 20, 30 years. So you always compare Putin with Gorbachev or Putin with Yeltsin. It was like that. After the annexation of Crimea, it's like overnight, it became about centuries. So you talk about Putin and Alexander III and Alexander I and Nicholas I and maybe Peter the Great. And it adds to this sense of depression and hopelessness, because you think, wow, and again, it was so good for Putin. Well, Russia has been always that unique, not really democratic. And what we took as a deviation, like the communist rule of 70 years, all of a sudden becomes a pattern which you almost cannot change. And lots of people began to think that it is always like that with the country. And again, it's good for the Kremlin, because if you play on these feelings of uniqueness, and we are always misunderstood by the outside world, we represent a unique civilization, it adds to this feeling of grandness. You are unique, you are fighting the entire world. But for liberals, it means that they are losing their ground. They don't know what to say to their people, to their audience. So yes, it's been getting more and more difficult starting in 2014.
And it's extraordinary, isn't it? When you compare that to, say, the 90s, many people, even if they didn't protest communism, and even if they didn't even do any kind of resistance to it and worked with the system, almost everybody knew that they were governed by people who told lies, and they acquiesced in those lies. And traveling around Russia in the 90s, you didn't get hostility. You didn't get that sense that anyone hated the West or Western values or hated Western culture. I mean, as with other places, and you get that in England as well, people might be disparaging about certain aspects of Western culture, but you didn't get that sort of deep enmity and negativity, because people had just come out of that frame of mind where we thought we were being lied to by our rulers, and there's all this information's come out that proves that. It's quite kind of disturbing, but there was a sense of sort of optimism and a partial, let's say, sort of breaking open of the historical archive. I haven't been to Russia for a long time, but I do get a sense from people who I've interviewed who have, that there is genuine enmity, that the last few years this toxic propaganda has created an environment of hatred, but also that the propaganda is far more effective. The sort of narratives that you've talked about that really tap into some deep concerns and trauma and psychology are actually working quite well, perhaps far, far better than, say, communist propaganda of the 70s and 80s were working.
Well, to be honest, I would say it's even more complex, because I vividly remember 1998. I was a young journalist back then, very liberal, and I worked for a liberal newspaper. And all of a sudden, we got this huge economic crisis and default, and we lost all our money. And the problem was that it was a very special kind of crisis. It hit mostly the most advanced and most energetic part of the society, businessmen, liberals, and they became really outraged. And they started blaming the West. That I remember really vividly. And also in my own newspaper, all of a sudden, my friends, my colleagues, they started mentioning Pinochet. We need to find someone like Pinochet to restore the order in our country. That's what I started like now hearing starting in 1998. To be honest, I was absolutely shocked. And the next year, the bombings of Belgrade provided an excuse to start hating the West. Like, you betrayed us. You promised us prosperity if we learn English and we change our country. We changed. We did. You failed us. That was the message. Putin just found a way how to exploit it. And when he got the Second Chechen War, and again, all democratic institutions we got after the perestroika, for instance, the media were blamed. And I found myself on the wrong side already in 2002 when I got my first criminal investigation by the FSB. And again, I remember that I was absolutely shocked by the lack of support from ordinary Russians. Yes, my colleagues, my journalists, they supported me when I was summoned to these interrogations to the Lefortovo prison. But ordinary people, no, many of them just told me, we don't want you to criticize Russian security services because we need to make them strong to fight corruption and terrorism, and we want security. That's the most important thing. And so to be honest, it's been a very long journey. And every time Putin understood how to play that and how to use this feeling. Just to give you one example, in 2008, when the war with Georgia started, and of course the Russian propaganda machine was already formidable. But what was really surprising, that instead of, say, attacking the Georgian troops and by claiming they committed, atrocities, something you might expect from the Kremlin propaganda, they choose to attack Western coverage. All of a sudden, they understood that it's better to attack not Georgia, but the West, and to accuse the West of double standards and all of that. And it was really, really successful. Lots of people around me started saying, yes, they've been always like that. We had this war with Georgia, and the West always been subversive, all treacherous, and all these things. So Putin always found a way how to use these feelings, which were deeply entrenched in Russian society starting in 1998.
I mean, all of these sound to me like narratives that are placed in people's heads. I mean, there may be some, organic arrival at these stories, but many of these narratives play so well with the sort of FSB paranoia and the techniques of manipulating people's behavior. It's fascinating for me how early this goes back, because clearly from the early 2000s, it was already happening, because we know from the apartment bombings, the Chechen War, and already they're using allegedly, grand events like these to manipulate how people feel and to manipulate the fear that causes people not to protest. But back in the 90s, in around sort of 90, I think it would have been sort of 97, 96, 97. And I was working for a Finnish oil company and speaking quite a lot, teaching English to the executives of that company. And we were talking about this resurgence of the sort of Siloviki, because you get the impression, and I know I'm not an expert on this, but I get the impression that in the early 90s, it was tremendously weakened. And people, left the service, or you never leave the FSB, of course, but they left and they went into business, inverted commas, etc. But as the 90s progressed, it seemed that sort of statist power center started to merge with the mafia. And this is something that people I was speaking to said was a definite process. You went from having your Krisha, which is your insurance, which you would have got from a mafiosi in the sort of 92, 93, 94. At some point, it seems transformed where the sort of FSB and Siloviki become your Krisha and protection. So I don't know, I think you've sort of studied this area. Do these narratives as well, these propagandistic narratives, do they come later, or do they come along with the resurgence of the police state, for want of a better word?
Well, I would say that Siloviki and the KGB and the successors of the KGB became confused right from the beginning, because there was this thing, like, you complain that the West helped to destroy the Soviet Union. That was a narrative, of course, and you might hear that already in 1992, 1993. But then you have this question, okay, if we take this as a theory that the West helped to destroy the Soviet Union, how come that you, the KGB, the most intelligent, the most powerful institution in the country, let that happen, right? It's a good question. Well, Putin did nothing to prevent that from happening. Okay, he was a small fish, but nevertheless, all these generals, all these big guys, big shots, why they did nothing? Why is the only thing they did, they sort of supported, but not really, this failed coup d'etat of August of 1991. And this coup d'etat actually failed, not because of Muscovites on the streets. And I was there, I was 15 years old, but I remember it was not about millions, it was about 100,000 people. So if, say, the KGB wanted to crush it, there was this capacity to crush it. But because of sabotage of the KGB, they didn't want to go to the streets and fight Muscovites. So why? And the reason is that in the Soviet Union, everything was about control. And the Communist Party was a tool to provide control for the Soviet leaders. The KGB was unhappy with being under control of the Communist Party. So when this control was destroyed, when the Communist Party was destroyed, at least to some extent, well, it met no resistance from the KGB. We were quite happy. So this narrative, started changing by, I would say, mid-1990s, when they decided to forget about the role they played in the collapse of the Soviet Union, because, as I said, they supported the destruction of the Communist Party. And by 1995, it became some sort of accepted narrative that, yes, there was this great power and all of that, and the great KGB. But that created a new thing, this horrible, I would say, really horrible feeling of insecurity. Because if you destroy the real narrative about what actually happened and why the Soviet Union collapsed, you have a very interesting dilemma. You have the 20th century, where you have two Russian empires, the real Russian Empire, and the Soviet Union being destroyed for no apparent reasons. And that creates this horrible feeling of insecurity that the next revolution might be started by something completely insignificant. And that's what Putin got. He understood that, and his people, that they need to crush every sign of dissent, because anything might start a new revolution. That is why gay activities are not allowed. That is why you cannot well, create an organization to help, I don't know, to build, to fix your streets, because you don't know what might start this new revolution. And that became a real ideology of people inside of the FSB. This feeling that the country is so fragile and might collapse for no apparent reason. So we need to crush everything to help it to actually to survive.
And that is a far more compelling explanation as well of the various invasions culminating in the invasion of Ukraine. Because if, you know, Ukrainians in the Donbass who Putin and his elite would have thought are essentially Russians in culture, language, everything, they would have seen them as indistinguished from Russians. If those people can become Ukrainian, and if after a couple of generations they can become tainted by Western values as he saw it, that must really feed into his paranoia. You know, if it can happen to them, it can happen to Muscovites, it can happen to people in Siberia, it can happen to anybody. And do you get a sense of that paranoia driving the invasion in Ukraine?
Yes, absolutely. And again, it's about two things. One is what is going on right now and what was happening just before the war started. For instance, at some moment, as you probably remember, Mikhail Saakashvili, a former president of Georgia, was a governor in Odessa region. And he made some interesting videos about himself, going to the beaches and destroying all these illegal things built by the local rich and corrupt officials. And these videos went viral in Russia because all of a sudden Russian people saw a governor and someone they remember from 1998 doing something for people. And of course it was very populist, but nevertheless, the Kremlin got afraid. All of a sudden you have this alternative and people started talking about it, and it was all in Russian, so you immediately understand what was going on. Everybody understand where Odessa is. So it was that, but also it was about history. Well, Putin, as we all now know, well, loves Russian history, loves reading about Russian history and about, especially about the Russian Revolution and the Civil War. So he probably remembers the 1918, when the question of Ukraine actually destroyed the White cause, because the White Guard, the Russian army, which fought for the restoration of the Russian Empire and the Tsar against Bolsheviks, they became so crazy with nationalism that they didn't want to unite their forces with Ukrainians. And that actually led to the collapse of the resistance to Bolsheviks. And that was actually the main reason why Bolsheviks survived. So Putin understood that from the very beginning, that Ukraine was a really big issue for the country. And he became obsessed with that.
And there's another dissonance there, isn't it? Because if he understands that story, he must understand that there is a distinct history, a distinct identity to Ukraine, and yet he is denying it. And, you know, it'd be interesting to get your point of view on this, because the word genocide has come up a lot recently. And there seems to be a big difference between, on the one level, you've got the sort of desire to control. So, you know, in Georgia, Central Asia, you can have Russian imperial control, or you can have the desire to control and manipulate the regimes in those countries to your interests, but you don't have that layer of genocidal tone about it. Whereas it seems that Belarus and Ukraine are something different, that if those territories do not cow down to, you know, the Kremlin's will, there's that extra edge there of, I would call it genocidal maliciousness. How do you explain that? And how does that fit in with the imperial project?
Well, I think it's about several things. And of course, I can only speculate because I'm not an expert on this. But I think it's about emotions, because almost every family in Russia, has some relatives in Ukraine, including my family. Part of my family comes from Ukraine, and that makes it so emotional. It's make it feels almost like a civil war. Well, of course, it's completely different for Ukraine because for them, it's a war for independence. But for the Russians, it sounds and feels for many of them as a civil war. So they're fighting their brothers, their parents. And when you fight on this level, you're not ready to listen to any rational argument. You are getting it's all getting really nasty. And that's exactly what is happening. The other problem is that there was always this strange assumption that Ukraine was much more prosperous than Central Russia. It's been, this kind of strange idea was extremely popular back in the Soviet Union. It was not only about about Georgia and North Caucasus, but also about Ukraine. Lots of anecdotes or lots of stories. So it's sort of in Russian psyche to some extent. But also, I think it's not about wealth. It's about a connection with the outside world. Part of the Russian identity is isolation. You might go miles and miles and miles from Moscow and still there are no borders, right? You're still in the country. You understand that. And you feel it. Now I'm in London, and to be honest, for me, one of the most striking feelings is that how close other countries are to the UK. You just take a flight and 40 minutes, you are in Paris. In Russia, it's always, you always have a different feeling, like you are locked in this huge territory and you need to, days to reach the borders of the other country. But in Ukraine, it's been always different. You always had neighbors. You had Austria-Hungary, you have Poland. It goes for centuries. And that is why I think people there are so different from the Russians, because they're much more connected. They have this habit of seeing other people and to understand that there are some other people who think differently. And while from the Russians' perspective, it was always, I would say they always think of Ukrainians with a mixture of feelings. And now, Putin just found a way how to export it all.
And now I think pure incomprehension as well as they evolve civil society and speaking to Ukrainians, there's an extraordinary streak of sort of stubbornness. If you tell them to do something, they'll potentially just do the opposite, just out of, not out of spite, but just out of an instinct to sort of feel like, I will not be told what to do. And it's almost at a cultural level. Of course, that's now being translated into all sorts of techniques and institutions, but the sort of cultural, emotional layer comes first and helps to enable the rest. And I think that explains some of the videos we've seen of some Russians, even ones who are not any particularly negative sentiment. They just say, well, why do you resist? Why don't you just give up and let it happen, and everything will be okay, and none of this is required. There'll be no more suffering. Just why do you have to do the opposite and just do what you're told? Is that quite a common feeling, do you think, amongst, say, fairly normal people who perhaps aren't into sort of, politics or history?
Well, actually, it's something you might see, and it's been present inside of the FSB. Then the FSB was put in charge of assessing the political situation in Ukraine. They've been always making this mistake. They've always been taking the civil society out of the question. It was always like that. So all these reports of the Fifth Service of the FSB, the foreign branch of the FSB, was always about the state institutions in Ukraine, always pointing at weak points like corruption and all of that. And all this completely disregards the role the civil society in Ukraine has been playing in all these things. And that is why I think, just look at the way Putin talks about Maidan. he completely disregards the role of the civil society. It's always like, well, Western leaders promised me something, and they betrayed me. It's like the Western leaders are actually like the main actors, the only actors in Kiev. Like there were no people on the streets, or if there were some people on the streets, they were all puppets, like soldiers told what to do, where to go, where to stand, and for how long. And he made the same mistake with the Russian civil society. But in Russia, it was not so disastrous for him because the civil society in Russia is much smaller, and it unfortunately and plays a very small role in Russian politics. And I'm really sorry to say that, because it's my personal strategy too. I mean, I'm a journalist, and for me, the most important thing is my audience, the interaction with the civil society. And of course, I've been seeing for all these years, starting in when I started actually in the late 1990s, that has been shrinking.
And turning to two aspects, and there's two questions I want to put, because I know we're sort of coming close to the end. One of those is, of course, obviously got the resurgence of aspects of the USSR, and even as we started off the conversation, GULAG economics. Another resurgence, which is rumored, is a return of the small-scale bandit capitalism. As the economy starts to really sort of grind, there are rumors that you're getting much more of a sort of black market and sort of low-level banditry to grease the wheels of the Russian economy. Is that just anecdotal, or are you seeing some signs of this sort of low-level lawlessness?
Well, it might be expected, the increase of the level of corruption, because if you already have the expansion of the role of the government, and that's exactly what is happening, because in the wartime economy, you need a really huge role of the government. It means that you go to the next level of the regions, and of course you see more corruption, because it's about the contracts being distributed, it's about control, it's about how you oversee all these military supplies, and so it's basically about corruption. And of course, we also already see in especially in regions shortages of things, and again that invites corruption and invites this kind of economy. At the same time, it's not comparable with what we saw in the 1990s, because the repressive apparatus is just enormous in comparison with what we saw in the 1990s. I mean, I've been in Moscow. I've been living in the area of Lefortovo, not far from the prison, and every year I just actually wanted to write a big piece about it. I've been seeing that there are more and more and more buildings occupied by the investigative committees, the interior ministries, the National Guards, the FSB, all these repressive organs of the state. They've been getting bigger and bigger and bigger. I want someone at some good moment just to paint a map of Moscow, how they all expanded over the last 20 years. It's just enormous, absolutely shocking. So they have so many forces to suppress and repress and control that it's absolutely incomparable with what we had in the 1990s.
I guess that's where a huge amount of the gas and oil revenues are probably channeled towards that, and creating a class of dependency, but obviously security as well. And that feeds very well. That was going to be my last question, because looking at Russian history, looking at that incredibly I would say buoyant period, the sort of silver age period of the sort of 1910s up to the First World War, where you start to get the emergence of a kind of civil society. You get sort of aristocrats and people who are much more involved in, local committees and stuff. And then, of course, after 1905, you get a lot more, I would say, sort of public debate and political activity going on. And it seems at that time, you did have organizations emerging to represent class interests. So whether that's landowners, peasants, clergy, etc., you start to get organizations that represent groups in society. and they would have had a certain sort of culture and set of values, and they would start to represent, you know, the people that they came from, their particular class grouping. It seems to me that the whole aspect of the Soviet Union was to sort of destroy all those identities and representations. And then, of course, you had the Siloviki and you had the Communist Party. So perhaps you had two major power centers in some kind of balance of power. Now, of course, you've only got one, which you've spoken very eloquently about earlier on, and Yuri Felshtinsky makes the same kind of point, that you've now got one kind of center of power, and it's the sort of the Siloviki have no one to really challenge them. The question here is, do they have a kind of class consciousness? Do they form a kind of class in themselves? Do they share the same values? Do they work towards a kind of common interest? Or is it not quite like that?
Well, I think it's not that cohesive and united. So it's not like junta. I would say they share some prejudices and fears and stereotypes and the language they use. The понятия, what they call понятия, of course, values and understandings of things, because they were all trained in the same school of thought. But what we've been seeing, especially starting in 2005, 2006, 2007, obviously, that these people actually, well, fought each other many times. They acted as mercenaries many times. And what they lack is the idea of future Russia. And it is quite striking. So you talk to people in Moscow and they talk about China. You go 100 kilometers from Moscow to Kaluga, and you and people there, I mean, the FSB people there might talk about the Soviet Union or North Korea even, or, well, you go farther and east especially, and you get some really bizarre ideas and concepts about Russia, like we need to get rid of Christian Judaism conspiracy, which sort of enslaved us for centuries. So we need to get back to, I don't know what, to some Slavic civilization. So it is bizarre, and there is, I would say, there is some sort of ideology. This idea of Russia being a besieged fortress, and the FSB being servants of the state, but that's probably all. It's not extremely cohesive. It helps Putin to some extent because his message is also quite vague, so he might appeal to many people. But at the same time, there is a big problem here. Like, what do you expect to see in Russia in 30 years when Putin would be gone, just because he will be dead? So what do you expect of the country? Always being in war with all the neighbors? I mean, you cannot sell it to the future generations, obviously. So I think there are problems there. And also I still am trying to be optimistic. So I think there's a big difference between the liberal intelligentsia and the beginning of the 20th century and now is that Russian liberals today are much more international, and they're not so crazy, to be honest. If you look and read what the Russian intellectuals actually wrote in the beginning of the 20th century, it was extremely imperialistic, it was very nationalistic. They have really bizarre ideas about many things, from humanities to science, and especially if you like check Russian philosophers, some of them were absolutely, I mean, they would be seen as intellectuals only in Russia, to be honest, because it was absolutely, well, unique. It fits only one country. Now, Russian educated class is much more international, and I think now finally, well, the ideas about the resurrection of the Russian Empire, it's just non-starters. Nobody wants that, and it's absolutely, now it's finally killed. That's for sure.
And of course, that idea, those ideas will expand if they meet no resistance. But actually, the West has risen up to an extent in a way that Putin clearly wasn't expecting, to resist the expansion of those ideas, physically, and the intellectual and economic expansion of that system, to the point where it seems that Putin is expending so much manpower, so much material, so much resource, burning through so much of the Russian economy. And this is going to be the last question, I know, because it's Saturday, and I'm sure you've got lots of things to do. But does there come a tipping point where he physically exhausts the system? He either gets moved aside or passes away because he's clearly not well, and that the whole thing is actually as fragile, or he's made it as fragile as his paranoia told him it was, and in some ways it collapses.
Well, I hate to say that, but unfortunately, it's a very resourceful country. It's very big, as we all know. And unfortunately, it might be a very, very long war. We don't, I think the big mistake is trying to be over-optimistic. Yes, there are signs of things are not really going really well for the Russian economy and Russian society and for the country, and lots of people are unhappy even in the Russian bureaucracy. But it is a resourceful country, and there are resources to fight this war for years, not months. We need to be ready for that. We need to have some sort of strategy. What to do with the country, what to do with this conflict if, say, it lasts 5 years. We need to have something ready for the Russian immigrants, for Russia, for the relationship. What might, for instance, be the future relationship between Russia and the West, between Russia and Ukraine? We need to start thinking how we can define it, because we will get there. Maybe not now, in some years, but we will get there. But in the meantime, again, we need to be ready that it might be a really long conflict.
And the role of emigres, and we'll put a link in because you've got this fascinating book about sort of emigres and the relationship with USSR, and obviously now it's become important as well as the diaspora has grown. But isn't it true that the West cannot impose a solution on Russia? It cannot create a forward-looking vision for Russia. We can discuss it, but it has to be, to an extent, Russian emigres, intellectuals, and the people you're talking about. They have to define what they want. They have to organize. They have to agitate, and possibly become far more activist than they currently are. Both in their adopted countries and in encouraging, I would call it sort of, a civil society insurgency in Russia itself. There doesn't seem to be much of that, I would say, campaigning activism that starts to get people to organize and think and plan about the future.
Yes, you're absolutely right. They're not that active as they should be. And there are problems with defining what might be the message for the people who are still in the country, because there are still really good people out there, activists and lawyers who are trying to help those protesters who are arrested and detained because of the protesting against the war. So there are lots of really good people. We need to keep this connection alive. We need to find a way how to talk to Ukrainians after the war ends, and they have so many things to do, to be honest. And the start was really slow for understandable and not really understandable reasons. Of course, logistically it's quite difficult, but at the same time we have some really, really good opportunities here. The previous generation didn't have. The internet is a fantastic thing, because still most of liberal-minded Russians who are still in the country, they rely almost exclusively on the message provided by Russian emigres, journalists, activists, writers, intellectuals, and we have that. So we need to use it to reach out to them and to find a way how to talk to them, and also to show to the world and Ukraine that not all 100% of Russians are for this war. It's not that, because it would fit Putin's narrative, and it would destroy any prospect of a real change. So yes, a lot of things we should done, and we've been like having these conversations with lots of people in Russian diasporas and all these countries. So it's a difficult task, but nobody would do that for us. We need to do that.
And, you know, I should say to the audience that you and Irina have been especially active in your writings, in the events you've been doing, and of course, these conversations, as you say, you have with many who are active in the diaspora. And yeah, I wanted to thank you for all of that. I highly recommend to the audience that they read your materials, subscribe and follow to your writings, because it really provides a sort of an intellectual map to what's going on, but also helps people to think about, you know, how they might change things for the future. It's been a huge pleasure speaking to you, Andrei. Incredibly enlightening.
Thank you.
And I'm very grateful to you for spending the time on a Saturday morning.
Thank you, Jonathan. Yeah, thank you.